أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن محمدًا رسول الله. أشهد أن محمدًا رسول الله. حي على الصلاة. حي على الصلاة. حي على الفلاح. حي على الفلاح. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. لا إله إلا الله.
إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا. من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له. وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله حق تقاته ولا تموتن إلا وأنتم مسلمون. يا أيها الناس اتقوا ربكم الذي خلقكم من نفس واحدة وخلق منها زوجها وبث منهما رجالا كثيرا ونساء. واتقوا الله الذي تساءلون به والأرحام إن الله كان عليكم رقيبا. يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله وقولوا قولا سديدا يصلح لكم أعمالكم ويغفر لكم ذنوبكم ومن يطع الله ورسوله فقد فاز فوزا عظيما فإن أصدق الحديث كتاب الله وخير الهدي هدي محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم وشر الأمور محدثاتها وكل محدثة بدعة وكل بدعة ضلالة وكل ضلالة في النار. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي آمين يا رب العالمين. We begin in the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and we seek His blessings and we seek His forgiveness, and we send peace and blessings upon His beloved messenger Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, and upon His family, and upon His companions, and upon all those who follow Him until the day of judgment. Allahumma ja'alna minhum. May Allah make us amongst them. Ameen ya Rabbil Alameen. One of the most commonly highlighted themes in the Quran, something which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions repeatedly over and over and over again, is His control over everything that happens. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, so many times throughout the Quran we find the repeated phrase, Inna Allah ala kulli shay'in qadir. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, indeed Allah is upon everything in control. Right? And so many times we find this throughout the Quran. And the reason why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions this over and over again is because this is something that so many people struggle with. So many people, they struggle with understanding that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one who is truly in control. And that we are supposed to give the effort, we're supposed to put everything into it as much as we can, but at the end of the day, the results come from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. At the end of the day, the outcome is only up to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That we plan, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala plans, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the best of all planners. This is something that many people struggle with. They struggle to internalize. And that's why Allah repeats it so many times. In fact, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala not only repeats this several times, but He will also give several different stories throughout the Quran that highlight this idea. Whether it's with Musa alayhi salam and his journey, and how so many times throughout the life of Musa alayhi salam it seemed like things were very negative. It seemed like everything was going against him. And then all of a sudden Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is able to turn the situation in his favor. So many times we find that throughout his life. Whether it was when he was speaking with Fir'aun, or when he was coming towards the sea and there was no way out. So many times we find that. Or you look at another messenger, another prophet like Yusuf alayhi salam, who throughout his life so many negative things happened, from being thrown into a well, to being sold into slavery, to being accused of wrongful acts that he did not do. So many things happened to him, and yet Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reminds us through that story that He is the one who is in control. And that even though it might seem like something is wrong or something is negative, Allah reminds us that He is the one who can change it at any moment's notice. And you find this in so many different stories. And I want to share with all of you, inshallah, one story from the life of the Prophet ﷺ that I think highlights this idea really, really well. In fact, in such a way that, arguably it is one of the most intense moments in the life of the Prophet ﷺ. Arguably it is one of the biggest tests, one of the toughest, trials that the Muslims and the companions of the Prophet ﷺ had to face. So difficult a trial, right? And I'll share that story with you, and it really, really puts into perspective this idea that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one in control. And this story, it takes place in the 6th year of the Hijrah, where the Prophet ﷺ, he has a dream. And this is when the Prophet ﷺ and the companions, they're in Medina already. And many of the important battles have already taken place. Badr has happened, Uhud has happened, Battle of Khandaq has happened. And the Prophet ﷺ, he has a dream. And in that dream, he sees that he is making tawaf around the Kaaba and that he is shaving his head, which signifies that he is making Umrah. And so the Prophet ﷺ, after seeing this dream, he becomes motivated and he takes this as a sign from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that he needs to go and make Umrah. And so he announces to the Muslims that he's going to go for Umrah. And 1,400 companions, they follow along with him. And they join him to go make Umrah. And when they do this, right, you have to understand that this is after, so many battles have taken place. The Meccans and the Quraysh especially, they're not allies with the Muslims. They have not come to peace with the Muslims yet. They're very much in a state of loss and anger towards the Muslims. And so as the Prophet ﷺ begins this journey, he sends one of the Muslims ahead to go and scout in Mecca and see what the situation is like. And the Meccans, they actually get word that the Muslims are preparing to make Umrah. And so now the Meccans begin to prepare for battle. Even though the Muslims, they're not going there to fight, they're not going there for conquest, they're not going there for anything like that. All they're doing is trying to, complete this form of worship. They want to do it in peace. And so when this companion, he arrives in Mecca, what he finds is that everyone, and he describes that every man, woman, and child was preparing for battle. And that they're really, really angry, especially coming after the loss in the Battle of Khandaq. This is their chance, they believe, the Quraysh, they believe this is their chance to finally wipe out the Muslims. And so the Prophet ﷺ, knowing this, or understanding that this is happening, he begins to become very worried and angry at the Quraysh, because to him, he's saying that all he wants to do is perform Umrah. He's not there to cause fight and to cause bloodshed. And so he's so annoyed that the Quraysh is preparing for battle when that is not his intention at all. Sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. And so, upon scouting, this companion, he also finds that Khalid bin Walid, who was not Muslim at the time, he has prepared a group of fighters to ambush the Muslims on the path to Mecca. And so the Prophet ﷺ, trying to avoid that, he takes a different route. He goes in a different direction and tries to go to Mecca in a different way. The problem with this is that the route that he needs to take is one that is extremely dangerous. It's filled with rocks that are burning. It's filled with thorns. There's so much danger in that area, but the Prophet ﷺ, because he wants to avoid fight and he wants to avoid any type of battle, he takes this path. And so the Muslims are struggling through this path. They're enduring it, and you can imagine 1,400 companions following the Prophet ﷺ, journeying through this path, and all they want to do is make Umrah, but they have to go through so much struggle to do so. Right? Really try to put yourself in their shoes and understand what they're going through here. And finally, after getting through this, and while this is happening, the Prophet ﷺ, he's motivating them, and he's telling them that this is their path to Jannah, and that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is pleased with them, and because of that, they stay motivated. But it's still very difficult for them. And so when they finally arrive at the outskirts of Mecca, they reach a valley that's known as the Valley of Hudaybiyah. And they're sitting there, and the Meccans are not allowing them to enter. And so what they do is they start to send a number of delegations to the Muslims to start to negotiate with them about what they're doing. And so they send a bunch of different negotiations take place, and in all of them, the Quraysh, they're not actually sending any of their own people yet. They're sending people from some of the tribes that they had alliances with. And when they're doing that, every single person that comes to the Prophet ﷺ to negotiate, to try to convince him to turn back, they mention things like the Quraysh is ready for battle, and that if you try to enter into Mecca, you're going to start to cause bloodshed. And so it's better for you to just turn around and go back. And they're trying to scare the Prophet ﷺ, and they're trying to prevent him from coming into Mecca to perform Umrah. And every single case in which the Prophet ﷺ is speaking to them, he's able to convince them that he is not there for any sort of bloodshed. He's able to convince them that all he wants to do is to perform the act of worship and not cause any problems. He even suggests that if the Quraysh have such a problem with it, and if they're unable to control themselves, they can leave the area for the amount of time that it takes for us to perform Umrah, so that we don't even interact with one another. We'll come there, we'll perform our Umrah, and then we'll leave. We won't even interact with the Quraysh. The Prophet ﷺ now starts to negotiate. And every single delegate who comes eventually agrees with the Prophet ﷺ and goes back to the Quraysh and starts pleading on behalf of the Muslims, saying that, you should just let them perform their Umrah, they're not here to do anything wrong. And the Quraysh, of course, because they're arrogant and because of the situation that they're in, they refuse to do that. And they refuse to do that. And so now the Prophet ﷺ, he decides to send one of his own, one of the Muslims. Up until now, it was the Quraysh sending people. But now the Prophet ﷺ, he decides, okay, I'm going to send somebody myself to go and negotiate. So he sends one of the companions. And upon entering into Mecca, the people of Quraysh, they recognize the camel as being one of the camels of the Muslims. And just by seeing that, before any negotiations take place, before the companion can even make a case for the Muslims, the Quraysh start to attack this companion. And they start to beat him, almost until that companion passes away. So much so, they attack him to the point where he almost dies. And eventually, they let him go. And then he returns back to the Muslims, injured severely, nearly dying in that situation. And now the Prophet ﷺ, he really begins to understand how angry and how, ready for battle the Quraysh is. And he wants to try to come to some sort of an agreement. And so he thinks to himself, and he sends one more delegate from the Muslims. And this time he doesn't just send, one of the companions. He sends Uthman radiallahu anhu. And he does this strategically, right? Understand what the Prophet ﷺ is doing here. He does this strategically. He sends Uthman because of Uthman's, close connection with Abu Sufyan, who's the leader of the Quraysh. And he knows that if Uthman goes, they won't attack him the way they did for the other companion, and they might actually listen to what he has to say. So the Prophet ﷺ, he's strategic here. And so he sends Uthman radiallahu anhu. And Uthman is entering into Mecca, and he's speaking with the leaders of Quraysh, and he's trying to negotiate with them, and they are not, willing to make any sort of deal. They don't want to hear what Uthman has to say. And so he spends some time there trying to convince them. And because he's there for a prolonged period of time, now you have to understand how the situation of the Muslims are unfolding. And remember, the point of this story is again to show you and to remind us all of the control that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has on the situation. Right? So now, after he's there for a prolonged period of time, the Muslims begin to get worried that they're not hearing back from Uthman and that he's taking a lot longer than he should have. And eventually rumors begin to spread amongst the Muslims that actually the Quraysh killed Uthman radiallahu anhu. And now the Muslims are enraged. They are so angry because they sent Uthman in a peaceful way to go and make negotiations, and they are under the impression that Uthman was killed. And so now the Muslims are extremely angry. And then because of this, they realize that they have no other choice, that now they have to go and avenge Uthman radiallahu anhu, and they have to go into battle. That is their only option. And so just before doing this, all of the companions who are there, roughly 1,400 companions, they come under the tree and they give their pledge of allegiance to the Prophet ﷺ. They make oath. And this is something that, they make oath that they are going to die in the cause of Allah if that is what happens. That they're going to put everything towards, and they're going to swear allegiance and to follow the messenger no matter what happens. They're going to stand by him in support of him. Sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. And these companions, they make this oath. And then they gather their weapons, and they gather their shields, and they gather their armor, and they begin to get ready to prepare for battle. And just as they are progressing towards Mecca, when they're about to engage in battle, Uthman radiallahu anhu exits, and he sees them. And now you can imagine the Muslims are so angry, and they see Uthman, and you can, just to give you an idea of how angry they really were, when they see him, they begin to question Uthman and say, did you make tawaf? Did you perform your umrah without us? Did you go and make tawaf around the Kaaba without us being there? And which is a ridiculous question. And Uthman himself, he responds by saying that he would never do that without the Prophet ﷺ being there. But you can see that the Muslims are so angry. They're in such a high emotional state at this time that they ask this question. SubhanAllah, that's what you see. Right? So you can see the emotions and the level of anger that they have at this point. And now they begin to wait again. And finally, the Quraysh, they send 2 delegates from their own tribe, from the Quraysh itself. And the Prophet ﷺ begins to see that he can make a deal with them. And one of those delegates from the Quraysh, his name was Suhail. And brothers, if you can please make your way forward a little bit to make room in the back, inshallah. Please try to fill up the spaces as close to the front as you can. And so one of the delegates who had come from the Quraysh, his name was Suhail, which comes from the word sahl, which means ease. And so when the Prophet ﷺ, he sees this person from the Quraysh, he turns to the Muslims and he says that the situation is about to get easy for us. Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. And so now the Muslims, they begin to have some hope. They begin to actually say that, okay, maybe this is where it'll finally work out. And you have to understand, they went through so much hardship to finally get there. After journeying through that difficult path, and then they arrive there, they're not allowed to enter, and all they want to do is perform their umrah. They're being prevented from doing so. Delegate after delegate they're dealing with. One of their own companions was beaten almost to the point of death. So much has taken place up until this point. Right? They've been through so much. And now finally Suhail, he sits down, and he sits with the Prophet ﷺ, and he begins and they begin to hash out the negotiations, what the deal is going to be. And the Prophet ﷺ, he calls for one of the companions, a scribe, to begin writing down the set of negotiations. And when he does it, the Prophet ﷺ, he tells him to write at the top of the page the basmala, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. And upon doing so, Suhail begins to question this, and he says, I don't know who Ar-Rahman is. So you can just put in the name of Allah. I don't know this Ar-Rahman. And so he's insulting the Prophet ﷺ, and he's insulting Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then after that, when the Prophet ﷺ, when his name is mentioned, the scribe is going to write Muhammad, the messenger of Allah. And Suhail, he argues with that, and he says, if I had thought that you were the messenger of Allah, then I would not be here negotiating with you. If I had thought that you were the messenger of Allah, we would not be fighting against you. So you can instead write Muhammad ibn Abdullah, Muhammad the son of Abdullah. And so now not only has Suhail, insulted Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala by removing Ar-Rahman, but now he's also insulted the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam by removing his title. Subhanallah. And you can imagine when witnessing, and while this is taking place, all of the companions are sitting around them watching. So they see everything that is happening. And as they're seeing this, they begin to, get really upset. These are the people that love the Prophet ﷺ more than anyone else. These are the people who, again, they just swore oath to the Prophet ﷺ and to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that they would follow him no matter what. These are the companions who fought in multiple battles for the Muslims, right? And they're witnessing this in front of them, and now they're really beginning to get agitated. They're beginning to get angry that how is this happening? And to make matters worse, now Suhail begins to actually outline the terms of the treaty, of the contract, of this negotiation. And he mentions a few things. The first thing that he mentions is that the Muslims cannot perform Umrah this year. And that is their ultimate goal. That is the only reason that they are there. They're not there for battle, they're not there for anything else, they're just there to make Umrah. And the first term of this treaty is that they cannot make Umrah this year, and that they have to return next year. And that too, when they come for Umrah, they only have 3 days to do so. And they have to come and finish the entire Umrah within 3 days, and they have to leave. They cannot stay any longer. Otherwise, they'll be in violation of the treaty. And the Prophet ﷺ, after some negotiation, he agrees. And now the companions are so upset. And you can imagine, they're thinking in their heads that the Prophet ﷺ, at the very beginning of the story, he had a dream that he was making Umrah. And this is their messenger. This is the one that they trust the most. And now the Prophet ﷺ is agreeing to not even make Umrah this year, that he'll come back next year. Now they're starting to get angry. Like, why is this happening? And if that wasn't bad enough, the next term of the treaty states that, and Suhail is the one who was mentioning this, he says that if a Muslim who was in Mecca, he escapes from Mecca, maybe he is held in captivity or he was hiding as a Muslim in Mecca, if he escapes and he arrives in Medina, and the Quraysh find out about that, and they come to Mecca, or they come to Medina and they ask for that person back, the Muslims have to give him back. They cannot keep him, no matter what the situation is. And just as this is happening, you can imagine, just as this is happening, a companion comes running from behind in the direction of Mecca. And he comes running, his name was Abu Jandal, and he is in chains. And this was a companion who was captured in battle and who was tortured in Mecca for, some reports say, up to 4 years. Constantly being tortured because of his belief, because he accepted Islam. And he managed to escape from the Quraysh, and he comes to the Muslims while this treaty is being signed, while the negotiations are taking place. And while this happens, Suhail, he points at Abu Jandal and he says, this is the first person you will return back to us. This is the first person you will return back to us. And the Prophet ﷺ begins to plead, and he says that we haven't actually signed the treaty yet, and this hasn't actually taken effect, so can we keep him? And Suhail, he holds his ground and he says that if you do not agree to this, the entire deal is off. The entire deal is off. And so the Prophet ﷺ, he begins to plead and he says, just give him to us, give him to us as a gift. Just gift him to us out of your mercy. And he says, no, the only thing I will give to you as a gift is that I will no longer torture him, but he will still have to stay in Mecca with us. You don't get him back. And now Abu Jandal himself, he's watching this all unfold in front of him, and 1,400 companions are watching this, and they're enraged that this is happening. They are so angry. This is their fellow Muslim who is in front of them, who had been tortured for 4 years, and now he's finally given the chance for freedom, and the Prophet ﷺ is being forced to give him back. The Prophet ﷺ is being forced to send him back to Mecca, so where he might be tortured again. And they're watching this unfold, and Abu Jandal himself, he begins to cry out, and he says, Ya ma'ashar al-muslimin. He calls out to the Muslims, and he says, are you really going to give me back to the people who have been torturing me, and who have been testing me in my faith? Are you really going to do that? And the Prophet ﷺ, he calls out to him, and he tells him, and he says, be patient, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will find a way out for you, and He will give you a way out, so be patient. But the companions, they're not coming to terms with this. But eventually the Prophet ﷺ, he agrees to this as well. And so many more points in the treaty that take place, and the last of them is that the Muslims and the Quraysh, they'll be at peace with one another. There's a treaty for 10 years. 10 years in which they cannot attack one another. 10 years in which they cannot fight anymore. And so as this is being signed, and the Prophet ﷺ, he finally signs this treaty, and all of the Muslims, they're so angry, they're watching it happen in front of them, and they can't do anything. The Prophet ﷺ, he signs the treaty, and Suhail, he walks away with Abu Jandal in his hand. And Abu Jandal is crying as he's being dragged away from the Muslims back to Mecca. And after this happens, the Muslims are so angry, and Umar bin Khattab, he stands up. And he starts calling out to the Prophet ﷺ, and he says to him, are you not the messenger of Allah? And the Prophet ﷺ says, yes, I am the messenger of Allah. And Umar bin Khattab, he says, and are we not the ones who are committed to truth, while they are the ones who are committed to falsehood? And the Prophet ﷺ, he says, yes, we are the ones committed to truth. And then Umar bin Khattab, he calls out again, and he says, then why are we taking the lower hand? Why are we not arguing with them? Why are we not fighting against this? Why are we accepting a treaty that is so much against us? If we are the ones who are actually on the truth, why are we accepting this? And the Prophet ﷺ, he responds and he says, I am the messenger of Allah, and Allah is our helper. That is all he says. And Umar bin Khattab, he sits down. And after a few moments, he gets so angry again. Can you imagine? First of all, take into consideration here that this is Umar bin Khattab questioning the Prophet ﷺ. This is Umar bin Khattab questioning the Prophet ﷺ. How much of an emotional state must he have been in that he did this? And notice that none of the other companions even stop him from doing so. None of the other companions even prevent him from doing so, because all of them are thinking this. All of them are angry. All of them are upset. They are mourning the loss of Abu Jandal. They're mourning this whole entire situation. And then Umar bin Khattab is so angry that he goes to Abu Bakr after this and he repeats the same exact thing. He says, are we not the ones who are committed to the truth? Is he not the messenger of Allah? Sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, and so on. And Abu Bakr then is able to calm him down. And he says to him, that he is the messenger of Allah. So don't raise your voice in his presence. Don't show your anger towards him. And Umar bin Khattab, he finally calms down a little bit. And now, as the Muslims are beginning to leave, they're beginning to turn around and go back. The Prophet ﷺ, he stands up in front of all of the companions after all that they have been through, and he mentions and he says to them, stand up, sacrifice your animals, and shave your heads. Because remember, they went there to perform Umrah. So he says to them, stand up, sacrifice your animals, and shave your heads. Not a single companion moves. In this gathering is Abu Bakr. In this gathering is Umar. In this gathering are the best companions, the ones who we hear so many stories about. This was the nation of Sami'na wa Ata'na. This was the nation that just swore allegiance to the Prophet ﷺ, that they would listen to everything that he said. He commands them, he says, stand up, sacrifice your animals, shave your heads, and nobody moves. He says it 3 times, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, and not a single companion moves. And so he enters in, the Prophet ﷺ, he goes into his tent, where his wife Salama is sitting, and he explains what just happened to her. And she says to him, go and you sacrifice your animal and shave your head, and they will follow. Just do it yourself, and they will follow you. And so the Prophet ﷺ, he exits the tent, and he does that. And eventually, after some time passes, the companions, they begin to follow him. But take into consideration here that they avoided this situation, that they were not listening to him. Sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. And yet, after this situation takes place, and if any one of us were to look at this situation, and if any one of us were to see, from an outside perspective, what the treaty was, we would say that this was ultimately a loss for the Muslims. We would say that there was nothing in this treaty that was good for the Muslims. They completely took a loss on this matter. And yet Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he reveals ayat in Surah Fath after this incident, and in the first verse of the surah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says something beautiful. He says, Inna fatahna laka fathan mubina. He says, no doubt we have opened for you an unparalleled victory. And Umar bin Khattab, when he hears this, he questions the Prophet ﷺ and he says, Afathan huwa? Is this a victory? And the Muslims, they don't understand how this is a victory. But they don't know that it is in the time after this treaty that they're going to be able to conquer thousands of tribes. They don't know that it is in the time after this treaty that they're going to be able to fight and win several battles. They don't know that in this time after the treaty, they're going to be able to build up their forces so much to the point where they're able to conquer Mecca without any sort of issue whatsoever, without any bloodshed happening. They don't know that this is going to happen. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reveals in this surah that it will happen. And to the companions who are in this situation, there is nothing that proves this statement from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In fact, everything is proving the exact opposite. And yet Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is able to take something that was a complete loss and turn it into something that was an absolute victory. أقول قولي هذا وأستغفر الله لي ولكم ولسائر المسلمين فاستغفروه إنه هو الغفور. بسم الله الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه أما بعد. From this story, we learn something really profound, right? We learn that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one who truly has knowledge over everything, and He is the one who is ultimately in control. Again, if any of us were to look at that situation, we would consider this to be a complete loss for the Muslims. And yet it turned out to be the exact thing that the Muslims needed. Those 10 years of peace and everything that took place in between was exactly what they needed in order to be successful, in order to actually do that conquest. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He mentions, and I'll finish with this, a very important ayah, something that every single one of us needs to be reminded of, something that every single one of us needs to constantly tell ourselves every single day. Where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says in Surah Al-Baqarah, He says, وَعَسَىٰ أَن تَكْرَهُ شَيْئًا وَهُوَ خَيْرٌ لَكُمْ وَعَسَىٰ أَن تُحِبُّ شَيْئًا وَهُوَ شَرٌّ لَكُمْ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says, it is possible that you might hate something when it is good for you. عَسَىٰ أَن تَكْرَهُ شَيْئًا وَهُوَ خَيْرٌ لَكُمْ. That you might hate something, but it's actually good for you. وَعَسَىٰ أَن تُحِبُّ شَيْئًا وَهُوَ شَرٌّ لَكُمْ. And it might be that you actually love something. You think something is good for you. You think everything is perfect, but that's actually bad for you. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He reminds us, He says, وَاللَّهُ يَعْلَمُ وَأَنْتُمْ لَا تَعْلَمُونَ. He says, and Allah knows and you do not know. Allah reminds us, this is the framework by which the Muslim views the world. This is the lens by which the Muslim views the world. The Muslim does not take a look at a situation and say that it is good or bad. The Muslim does not take a look at a situation and become hopeless in situations that are difficult. Nor does the Muslim become overly joyed in times that are good. Because he understands that everything ultimately comes from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that He is the one who is in complete control. And that no matter what the situation is, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one in control. Umar bin Khattab, he has a beautiful quote where he says, go easy on yourself, for the outcome of all affairs is determined by Allah. No amount of worrying can change the future, and no amount of grieving can change the past. What a beautiful and profound quote that we learn. And that so many times this is a theme that is emphasized repeatedly throughout the Quran. And it's something that we need to remind ourselves of. That when we're in a very difficult situation, and we are, sometimes this is something that even causes people to lose faith. So many people, when they go through difficult situations like that, they begin to question, where is Allah in these situations? Where is Allah? And Allah is reminding us, وَاللَّهُ يَعْلَمُ وَأَنْتُمْ لَا تَعْلَمُونَ. Allah knows and we don't know. And we have to continuously remind ourselves. And what happens when we do that, when we finally begin to come to terms with the fact that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one in control, and that He can change any situation, once we fully understand that, that's when we have contentment. That's when we become unshakable. That's when we begin to have the strength that the companions had. That's when we begin to understand the true, dignity and the true power that these messengers and that these prophets had. It was because of this unparalleled trust that they had in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make us amongst those who continuously put our trust in Him. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make us amongst those who totally trust Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's plan. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allow us to be content with the outcome of all of our affairs. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala enter us all into Jannat al-Firdaus. Allahumma ameen. ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار. سبحانك رب العزة عما يصفون وسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين وأقيموا الصلاة.
الله أكبر الله أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح قد قامت الصلاة قد قامت الصلاة الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله الله أكبر. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. هم الذين كفروا وصدوكم عن المسجد الحرام والهدي معكوفا أن يبلغ محله ولولا رجال مؤمنون ونساء مؤمنات لم تعلموهم أن تطؤوهم فتصيبكم منهم معرة بغير علم ليدخل الله في رحمته من يشاء لو تزيلوا لعذبنا الذين كفروا منهم عذابا أليما إذ جعل الذين كفروا في قلوبهم الحمية حمية الجاهلية فأنزل الله سكينته على رسوله وعلى المؤمنين فأنزل الله سكينته على رسوله وعلى المؤمنين وألزمهم كلمة التقوى وكانوا أحق بها وأهلها وكان الله بكل شيء عليما. لقد صدق الله رسوله الرؤيا بالحق لتدخلن المسجد الحرام إن شاء الله آمنين محلقين رؤوسكم ومقصرين لا تخافون فعلم ما لم تعلموا فجعل من دون ذلك فتحا قريبا. الله أكبر. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. الله الله أكبر. الله أكبر. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم قل هو الله أحد الله الصمد لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد. الله أكبر. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. هذا كان أجريت عملية جراحية لأخينا الحج أحمد شمس. أجريت لأخينا الحج أحمد شمس عملية جراحية. نسأل الله سبحانه وتعالى برحمته وهو أرحم الراحمين أن يعليها بالعافية. اللهم أعلي أخينا الحج أحمد شمس إلى العافية. اللهم امسح عنه بيمينك الشافية الكافية. اللهم داويه بدوائك. اللهم اشفيه بشفائك. اللهم عافيه من ابتلائك يا أرحم الراحمين. اللهم رب الناس أذهب البأس واشفيه وأنت الشافي. لا شفاء إلا شفاؤك شفاء لا يغادر سقما. اللهم لا تدع لنا مريضا إلا شفيته، ولا ذنبا إلا غفرته، ولا مبتلا إلا عافيته، ولا حاجة من حوائج الدنيا إلا قضيتها ويسرتها لنا برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وآله وصحبه أجمعين.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Just a quick reminder, inshallah, tomorrow will be the Eid Carnival here in the Masjid. We invite everyone and their families to come join us. There's going to be food, games, activities, a petting zoo. It's for families, all ages, so we encourage everyone to come. It starts tomorrow at 1 p.m., ends at 6 p.m. And if you're parked in the new parking area, please clear out after Jummah because that's going to be the area for the event. So inshallah tomorrow at 1 p.m. Jazakallah khair.
My sister's birthday is coming. I'll show you my son. Who was it that I was talking to on the text? It says Kareem. Yeah, that's like.
بنسجل ابعت اللينك ندخل اللينك وابعته لك بس بيقول بالراحه عارف بنشوف والعيال بيقولوا ورا نفس الايه اسهل انهم يقعدوا يقعدوا ده على اليوتيوب فتبعت للناس اللينك حتى يكملوا انا بقول لك عشان كده